But he would say things like, of course, nobody would seriously maintain that our dusky cousins could possibly match us for intellectual ability, that kind of thing. Now, that was progressive opinion, liberal opinion for its time. You can imagine what the less progressive opinion was like. To me, this is a very encouraging indicator of how the zeitgeist moves really quite rapidly, even going back to, well, within my lifetime and before. If you read fiction, detective fiction of the 1920s, Agatha Christie, Bulldog Drummond, you find what sounds the most atrocious racism in these books, just absolutely normal and accepted in the 1920s. How things change, how rapidly things change. In The God Delusion, I make this the basis for an argument against the suggestion which you raised earlier, that you need religion in order to be moral. The fact that the moral zeitgeist moves so rapidly from day, and we all move together, whether we're religious or not. In the 1920s, a lot of people would have been racist and sexist, whether they were religious or not. Today, most educated people are at least much less so, whether they're religious or not. We move on with great rapidity, with dramatic rapidity, and religion doesn't seem to have anything to do with it. I think it's a fairly telling piece of evidence.
We understand from the studies of people like Noam Chomsky and others that, for instance, we have humans are hardwired for language. It's in our genes. But there's been a tendency to attribute a lot of characteristics, a lot of traces of our personality, of the way we are, to evolution. Do you think people are going overboard with that?
It's always been a problem, this swinging backwards and forwards in this particular argument. It tends to be correlated with one's position on the political spectrum, left to right. Chomsky is an interesting case because he is a man of the left, very definitely, in politics, a very highly effective spokesman for the left in America, and also in linguistics, however, he is associated with the view that, as you say, language acquisition is hardwired in our genes. It's important not to misunderstand that. Of course, it doesn't mean that we are born knowing a language. Everybody knows that's not true. But we are born with neural machinery which is hardwired, eager to learn language, has the capacity to construct grammar, and it's very easy for it to construct grammar when the child hears grammatical language spoken. The chimpanzee studies that have been done teaching chimpanzees things like American Sign Language, the language of the deaf, it's controversial. Nobody denies that these chimpanzees can learn a very large vocabulary of a couple of hundred words from the sign language dictionary, but most linguists do not accept that these chimpanzees are capable of the sort of hierarchical syntax, the recursive syntax, which Chomsky has uncovered, Chomsky and others have uncovered in human language. It seems that the human brain is uniquely hardwired to do syntax, to generate it and to understand it and to read it. So,
how about other traces of personality?
Well, the evidence you can get on other traces of personality are, for example, twin studies. You know that monozygotic twins, identical twins that are formed by the splitting of a fertilized egg, all the same genes. If you compare how alike twins are, identical twins are, and compare that with how alike non-identical twins are, dizygotic twins are, then you can get a measure for the importance of genes in determining variation. So if you take something like eye color, if you know the eye color of one twin, you absolutely know the eye color of the other twin if they're monozygotic, but if they're dizygotic, you don't. they might have eye colors. So with eye color, the heritability is 1. You can obtain a figure for heritability. This is a number that tells you how predictable the one twin is if you know what the other twin is. That would be one way to put it. And things like intelligence, as measured by various IQ metrics, tend to have a fairly high heritability, but it isn't 1. So if you know the IQ of one twin, if they're identical twins, you've got a pretty good idea that the other one will be the same, but it won't be exactly the same. And like musical ability, mathematical ability, sexual orientation, people have looked at the resemblance between monozygotic twins compared to dizygotic twins with respect to each of these characteristics, and obtained a heritability score somewhere between 1, which means absolute heritability, and 0, which means that if you know the characteristics of one twin, it tells you absolutely nothing about the characteristics of the other twin. So the truth is somewhere in between 0 and 1, and it varies between 0 and 1 in different characteristics. What's wrong is to think that because something has a degree of statistical genetic determination, that therefore it's somehow any more irrevocable and unchangeable than any other kind of determination. If, for example, you found that there are genes for religious belief, if there's one twin is religious, the other one tends to be religious, there is some evidence for that. It could very well be that that is an important effect, but that environment could be even more determinate. That if children are exposed to nuns in their early childhood, it could be even harder to shake it off later than if you have genes that make you religious. So there's nothing magical, there's nothing super deterministic about genes.
Still on this subject of the tendency to apply evolution to other areas, a key area, of course, is society. And in your book, A Devil's Chaplain, that we mentioned before, you wrote that, as a scientist, I'm a Darwinian, but in politics and how we conduct our affairs, I'm a passionate anti-Darwinian. Can you explain that?
Yes. That actually is the meaning of the central message of the essay called A Devil's Chaplain, which is the opening